Hi, my name is Liz Inslee, and I am going to do an adaptation of Little Red Riding Hood. When I first found out I was going to have to do this performance, I went to the library and checked out a book, Annotated Classic Fairy Tales. And it was all these different versions of Little Red Riding Hood. So I decided that I was going to do my own version of Little Red Riding Hood. So here it is. There once was a girl whose name was Little Red. Now you may ask, why was her name Little Red? Well, she wore a cloak with a cape on it everywhere she went, so she got the nickname Little Red. One day, her mother says to her, "Little Red, I need you to go to your grandmother's house to take some soup and some medicine, because she is not feeling well." So her mother goes and gets this basket to give it to her. But then before she lets her go out the door, she also says, "Now, Little Red, do not talk to strangers and make sure that you stay on the path." Little Red says, "Not to worry, Mother, I will not get lost, and I will stay on the path." And out the door she goes. She's on the path and she is walking when she comes along and sees a wolf walking on the path as well. She smiles, he smiles. He says, "Good day, Little Red, and how are you this fine day? Out for a stroll?" Little Red says, "I am just great, Wolf. I am on my way to see my grandmother. She is sick, and my mother wants me to give her some soup and some medicine so that she will feel better." Meanwhile, while she is saying this in her brain, she's thinking in her thoughts, she's thinking to herself, "You know, my mother said not to talk to strangers, but he is so nice. He looks harmless. Yes, he's a wolf, but he looks harmless. I don't think he would do anything to harm me." And she pushes those thoughts right out of her mind. Well, while they're walking along, the wolf thinks to himself, she's going to her grandmother's house. Boy, that would be a great place to go to get me some lunch. I could go and I could have her for lunch, and then afterwards I could have her grandmother for dessert. So he bids Little Red farewell, and off he goes through the woods and gets to grandmother's house. He gets to grandmother's house and he goes in and she's asleep in the bed, and he grabs her and he ties her up with a bed sheet and puts her underneath the bed. Once he does that, he sees Little Red coming down the lane. So he goes and gets a nightcap to put on to hide his ears and a nightgown. Once he puts that on, and then he gets in the bed. Not 2 seconds later, Little Red comes to the door, and she sees that it's cracked, and she's opening the door. "Grandmother? Grandmother, are you okay? Are you here? Is everything all right?" And she finally hears, "Yes, dear, I'm here. I'm here. I'm in bed." So in the house she goes to the bed. She says, "Oh, Grandmother, I was so worried. I didn't know where you were. I'm just glad that you were here resting." So she says, "My mother, I have some soup and some medicine from my mother." She puts the basket down. She sits on the edge of the bed and she gets the bowl out. And she says, "I'm going to give you some of this soup first, and then we can give you your medicine." So she does all that, and she looks at Grandmother and she says, "What big eyes you have, Grandmother." And Grandmother says, "The better to see you with, my dear." And then she takes the spoon to her mouth, and the grandmother, who's really the wolf, opens his mouth and she says, "Oh, Grandmother, what big teeth you have." And he says, "The better to grab you with." And before he can grab her grandmother jumps from underneath the bed and grabs onto Little Red. And wouldn't you know it, Grandma had a baseball bat underneath the bed. And she starts whacking on the wolf. And she hits her, and she hits him. And she says, "How dare you prey on an old woman and her granddaughter? How dare you?" And finally the wolf is looking around like, "Oh my goodness, is there somewhere for me to get out of here?" And he sees an open window. And then he goes out the open window and runs all the way to the other end of town, and he's never seen again. What's the moral to this story? Don't talk to strangers, and if you're a criminal, make sure you scope out your house, the house you're going to go to before you go there, because you never know, there might be an old lady with a bat. Thank you for listening to my story.